Hi, this is part 3 of my story. So I finished off on the last story that I was in hospital now for the second time. I'd been in a couple of days when I finished the last story. So I ended up staying in that ward for another 10 days. I didn't meet the doctor for that ward for about a week. Nobody really came near me. The nurses very obviously thought I was in with diabetes. Nobody seemed to know I'd had a seizure. I was getting the medication, but they were overdosing me on insulin because nobody had read the notes and they thought I'd come into the hospital on insulin rather than the steroids had given me like a false reading of high blood sugar. So that did get corrected and I did get out on the 3rd or 4th of January with follow-up phone calls to come. Nobody seemed to clarify what was happening. I had been told it was strokes, it wasn't strokes, it was strokes, it wasn't strokes. I'd been told I'd been brain cancer. I'd been told I more than likely had neurosarcoidosis and possibly some sort of an encephalitis. But that would get followed up with neurology after I'd left the hospital. So I had gone home. I did finally get most of my vision back on, I think, the 27th or 28th of December, which was really good. The headaches had gone down a bit. But nobody was really asking me these questions, to be quite honest. There was a skeleton staff, and after I left hospital, within 3 days, the entire ward had come down with the Omicron variant of COVID. So I got out just in time, or I'd been forced to stay in another week. There was a follow-up phone call from the stroke clinic doctor. She had said to me that they'd got more results than the MRIs, and that the lesions had got worse, and my brain, it was actually deteriorating rather than getting better, but the medication was like a band-aid. So they'd taken me off the stroke medication, but they kept me on aspirin, blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, and the anticonvulsants. So nobody had told me when I left the hospital that if I was still having any type of seizures or convulsions, that I could up that medication to a certain amount, but she had advised me of this, so we did do that. My diagnosis at that time was still pretty up and down. There was differential diagnosis, so meningitis, encephalitis, sarcoidosis, possibly an autoimmune condition, various types of cancers like a metastasized or carcinomatosis. They did think it was that, quite honestly, and that I would get a phone call from a one-stop shop neurologist that calls you from a nearby hospital. She did call me. She went through things a lot clearer. So she had told me that my brain had lit up at the back and it had been missed on MRIs. So I had brain damage to the back left occipital lobe. But they would be doing further testing because she expected it to be more than that. White matter lesions. They had found a calcified, what they called a cavernova in my frontal lobe. In my temporal lobe, they had found a larger meningioma. However, they don't think that's related and they're not overly worried about that, although they'll keep their eye on it. But she said they were doing further tests, that she suspected vasculitis as well, and I had to go and get a whole load of cancer testing. So she had sent me to a neurologist that was in my hometown, and I then consecutively got declined quite a few neurologists because I was too emergent and too complex and I needed to be treated in a hospital. So although you're angry at first that these neurologists are declining you, actually it's because they can't help you in a clinical setting. Eventually I did get to a neurologist in a clinical setting who happened to know somebody in a hospital that specialises in neurology in Ontario, and she actually knew the director of that department, from what I gather, and she got me in there. So I did then have an appointment to go and see a neurologist. She didn't actually take me off her records. I'm still in her books, and she was really, really helpful. My own doctor by now is getting involved, and she's now taken over trying to help get me to the right places. But realistically, it's kind of not her job because she's a general practitioner and she has gone above and beyond. Symptoms for me. So here are some of my symptoms. This is not all of them. So this is now, we're now at beginning of March. Hair loss, bilateral eye flickering, paroxysmal pains, which is like neuropathy. So it's kind of like, for me, it's like somebody stabbed a poker into my ankle. It used to always only be my right side, but it spread to my left side. It literally lasts a couple of seconds, but it's so excruciating that if it lasted more than that, you wouldn't be able to survive. Dropping objects, or I call it dropsy. Intermittently, I don't know why. Monophasic jerks. So that happens, generally my jerks are at night time. You could call it twitching, you could call it jerking, but it's like a myoclonic seizure basically, which I didn't know that was actually a seizure until I asked the question. Spacing out. Everybody thinks they space out. When you have absent seizures, it's not the same spacing out. I wish it was just the regular spacing out, but I can lose a few seconds, but sometimes I don't know what's happened. It's just very, very strange and hard to explain. Limb sensory loss. So I didn't actually realise that until I went back into hospital again after this, which we'll get to soon. But I didn't realise this until they were doing some of the testing they were doing for, oh my goodness, that's terrible. I forget words quite a lot. That's obviously one of the symptoms. But when they do I can't remember the word, when they check the reflex tools. I'm not actually going to delete this one because that's very much the point. I forget words quite a lot. Hallucinations. So hallucinations are in different ways, and people feel free to research hallucinations. Mine were, my eye was actually a huge hallucination, but it was very real to me. Insects in the wall, very real to me. And I've been asked what other hallucinations I have, but I can't tell you if I don't know they're hallucinations. Seizure disorder, I have various types of seizures. High blood pressure, diabetes, dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is coordination and balance skills. So I can stumble, and a lot of people stumble and they don't realise it's something, but when you're tested in hospital, they find out whether it's a condition or not, and I was diagnosed with dyspraxia. Constructional difficulties, that's apraxia. That's a neurological disorder, and that's when you, for example, can't figure out how to complete skills because you know what to do, but your brain won't pass that information on. That's the best way I can describe it. Dysgraphia, that's letter writing, so I'll sometimes turn letter into numbers into letters. Somebody will ask me to repeat their phone number or postcode, and I'll mix up the numbers and letters. So I'm kind of at work part-time-ish just now, so I have to be really careful on that for the job I do. Dyslexia, I've never had dyslexia until this happened, but again, it's another neurological issue. I have some language dysfunction, mixing up words. So sometimes I might go to say pole and say post, things like that you could say, oh, that's normal. With my situation, it really isn't normal. So I do the very best I can. Phantosmia, sometimes I smell things that aren't there. That's only been the last year or so. Gait issues, I have had gait issues due to some issues I have with my back, so I don't know if that's coincidental or part of this. Hyperreflexia, which is apparently that hyperreflexia is when you have too much reflexes, and that can be caused by brain damage basically, or brain lesions sometimes. Fifth digit abandonment, it's a very strange thing. So if you put your hand out like this, I can push against that, but I can't push against that. Now that is a sign of brain injury, so not that you generally do that kind of a thing. And short-term memory loss. So my long-term memory is actually not too bad, I think. No one's told me it isn't. My short-term memory can be fine and then just go, and I can't remember the conversation we had, and I don't believe you that we've had the conversation, but then I finally will remember it. So that's just some of the symptoms. I did get out of the hospital, and as I said to you, I spoke to a couple of neurologists, and I spoke to the stroke doctor again, and next time we come back, we'll touch on my first meeting with the neurologist I have now. Thank you very much for listening.